welcome to The Power Is Now. My name is Eric Frazier. It's a beautiful day in Southern California, a great day to talk about real estate. Now, this is our second year of talking about the 1968 Fair Housing Act. And the Fair Housing Act began 54 years ago, and we decided last year, and we just made a commitment that we're going to talk about this important piece of legislation for as long as the power is in existence. And so that's what we're doing. This is our second year in this series of discussions with industry leaders about the 1968 Fair Housing Act, how important it is, what can we do to make it more effective, how can we put some teeth behind enforcement of it, and why haven't things really changed in terms of the rate of homeownership, particularly for African Americans and other minorities. And so with me today, we have a true industry leader, both in real estate and in mortgage and in just really politics, if you will, as it relates to real estate and mortgage. His name is Ed Delgado, and he is the managing director of Mortgage Policy Advisors based in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Ed, to the program.
Eric, it is always a pleasure to see you and your beaming smile. It's great to be with you again.
Ed, it is always a pleasure to have you on the show. I really enjoy our discussions, and you always seem to elevate the conversation regardless of the topic. And so you have a permanent place here on The Power Is Now. Anytime we are talking about important subject matters as it relates to real estate and banking. And today is a very important topic, the 1968 Fair Housing Act. And I just can't wait to get your perspective on the law and what we can do to perhaps make things better as a result of the law for everyone. Now, folks, before we bring Ed on, we're going to take a quick commercial break and to talk about, fair housing as well as other things that we have going on here at The Power Is Now. I want to invite you to go to our website at thepowerisnow.com, and there you'll find magazines, you'll find podcasts, TV shows, all centered around real estate. Our goal is to educate and to inform consumers and real estate professionals about what's happening in real estate. It is not entertainment, it is information. And our goal is to be the HDTV of real estate information, like they are of real estate entertainment across the nation. So you're listening to The Power Is Now TV. For those of you who are watching us on Apple TV, Roku, Fire TV, and the podcast, stay tuned. When we come back, you're going to hear more from Ed Delgado right here on The Power Is Now.
Want to keep up with the current developments happening in the world of real estate? The Real Estate Roundtable, hosted by Eric L. Frazier, is a show you do not want to miss. The show features a panel of VIP agents who are passionate about helping people. It is what they do best. They discuss today's hot topics, latest market updates and trends. The panel also conducts interviews with prominent figures in the industry. New episode every Friday live on Facebook and replay on the Power Is Now YouTube channel.
And we're back. For those of you just joining us, welcome to The Power Is Now TV. This is our second year in talking about the 1968 Fair Housing Act. And with us today is Ed Delgado. He's a managing director of Mortgage Policy Advisors based in Washington, D.C. And Ed is here to talk about the 1968 Fair Housing Act. Thank you again, Ed, for joining us. And let's get right into it.
Eric, always a pleasure to see you. Thank you for having me on the show. And listen, before we get started, thank you for all you do for the industry. As you said, you are an anchor of information. People rely on you, and you and I go way back. We've been working together for a number of years. I think you didn't have that white beard when I met you, and I didn't have this extra 20, 30 pounds around my belly when I met you. So we're aging gracefully together, sir, and it's a privilege and an honor to do so. So thank you for having me.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't know if I'm aging gracefully. For sure you are, though, man. You still get that baby skin. So you're looking good, Ed.
Thanks.
Now, Ed, tell our audience a little bit about your role as the managing director of Mortgage Policy Advisors.
Yeah, and thanks for that. Look, Mortgage Policy Advisors is a mouthful. We call it MPA. Essentially, we work with clients on policy, regulatory advice, strategic business counsel, and then business development, third-party outside sales support for those organizations. And that company started about 2 years ago, and my partner Marcel Breyer and I are we just love every day. I still am affiliated with Five Star. I'm still chairman of that organization. I consider that an honor as well. And hopefully many of your listeners are and viewers are familiar with Five Star Institute and great work they do in the membership conferences and editorial space. So that's what I've been up to past couple of years.
Ed, your involvement in real estate and now in your current position, you kind of, it's really a necessity for you to stay on top of what's going on, whether it be legislation or policy as relates to real estate and housing. And April, as you know, is Fair Housing Month. And I think it's important for, all of us to really take in consideration, like we do, other months of the year, how critical, how important fair housing is to everyone. And it should be a discussion on every kitchen table. Don't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. We always identify with housing being part of the American dream. That's a very lofty identification, right? And the American dream is home ownership. And I think that this is a timely discussion. I think the relevance of the Fair Housing Act simply cannot be understated. So I'm looking forward to some of your questions and being able to share some thoughts and views with your audience.
Well, let's start there in terms of how important is the Fair Housing Act. There are many who believe that we don't really need a Fair Housing Act. In fact, it's the same group that believe we don't really need any laws at all, right, as it relates to discrimination.
Yeah.
But do we need a Fair Housing Act today?
Yes, and the simple answer is yes. And I think you mentioned it at the start of your program, is that this act was born 54 years ago. But I think it's as important, if not more so important today, given the expansion of home ownership and the diversification of America. If we simplify the act, what does it stand for? Well, in summary, it's intended to prohibit discrimination in housing based on race or color or national origin, religion, sex, including sexual orientation, gender identity, familial status, and disability. So that's a lot to cover as an act. And the reason why I said it's more important today than in recent past is that our nation is currently divided. It's sad for me to say, but we are divided as a nation, and we see it on the streets. We watch it on the news on a nightly basis about hostility, Americans versus Americans. If you're a fan of social media, it permeates every channel of social media out there. So you have a lot of hostility and anger that effectively has replaced common courtesy and respect for all Americans. And it's this ignorance that I think we have a responsibility to make sure it doesn't permeate the housing market. I said something to you off air where I said discrimination doesn't discriminate. And I'm not trying to be cute. Discrimination can go against, commonly we see it against Black or African Americans, against Latinos. At the height of COVID, there was a lot of violence against Asian Americans in this nation. There's violence against people with different sexual orientation. So, I think we all of us that participate in the ecosystem of housing have a duty and responsibility to make sure that ignorance doesn't impact our industry that we're all so proud to serve in.
Ed, I agree with you. And I also think it's not just those who participate in the ecosystem, as professionals or service providers, but I believe that the responsibility lies with every citizen of this country. If you truly believe and the ideals of what, of America, what that means in terms of freedom and opportunity, then you also want to embrace your saying, by the way, which I think is great: discrimination doesn't discriminate. Anybody could be a victim of discrimination. And if it's not your race or your religion or your ethnicity, it could be your health situation, like you mentioned earlier with COVID. It could be your disability, which is prohibited now by law, but discrimination does not discriminate. And I think that's a great quote, folks. You may want to mark that down. Make sure you give Ed credit. Discrimination does not discriminate.
Yeah, look, my wife told me before I did this, don't put on your political cap. So I've been cautious. You never want to pit red against blue. But the reality is, look, I think we've lost our way as a nation, right? I think we've lost. It's okay to be different. Our nation was founded on differences. It's what makes this nation as great as it is that we can have intellectual conversation about our differences and find a common resolve towards the benefit of all. But the moment you disrespect or dismiss or denounce somebody else's view, that without accepting it for what it is, then it starts to breed this ignorance that I think we're talking about. So back to the Fair Housing Act, I think it was established as a means by which we can move forward as a nation. And you think about the turbulent times that the act was brought about with 1968. I was only 5 or 6 years old in 1968, so I don't have firsthand memory. But I'm a fan and student of history, and to see the turmoil and the nation get torn apart with the assassination of John F. Kennedy and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. I mean, this nation was in turmoil. And from that conflict came about this act that here we are, more than half a century later, talking about its value. So there is a path in which our nation heals and learns from our mistakes and moves forward. And I'm hoping that, again, programs like yours that bring about an opportunity to have an open, honest dialogue benefit those that are in need of home ownership.
We should be able to have an open and honest dialogue, and perhaps it is the red versus blue. It is people just digging in and with their views that really support maybe a more homogeneous society where separate and equal, so to speak, and which is not a reality. We need to come together, and not coming together ever since from the 1964 Civil Rights Act to the 1968 Fair Housing Act, we are still seeing from that point to this very day a great deal of turmoil and conflict and unrest. And as a result of that, you have many groups that have come up, one notably Black Lives Matter, because of the unarmed shooting of African Americans. And this gets into more of just life in America, being able to enjoy the freedoms we want to enjoy in America. But it also goes down to just being able to transact business in America. And I mean, well into the 70s and 80s, many African Americans could not be members of real estate associations. And so the impact of that legislation was immediate in some respects, in that it was law, but the adoption of the law, well, it's still a problem.
Yep. No, I think it is, right. But look, I do want to be positive, right? So it's not all doom and gloom. We have to always march forward, right? And I think if we take a look at the housing industry today, and I would ask you and your listeners, are we better off today than we were 15, 20 years ago? And the answer is yes. Are we better off than where we were 50 years ago? The answer is yes. Are we better today than we will be 10 years from tomorrow? The answer is no, right? So you have to look at this, in my opinion, Eric, you have to look at this as we're making progress. Sometimes that progress is painfully slow and almost imperceptible day after day, and sometimes year after year. But I think we have to keep moving forward, because that's the only way you're going to affect change. And that change hopefully brings about a better industry for us all. So, it's sad, right? And there's a lot of bad things that happened in our industry over the last 50 years. And we don't like to talk about it, but we need to, because that's how you learn, right? And I again, going back to this act, when I got the invite, I was like, what a brilliant thing to do, is talk about this act and why it's relevant today, or is it even relevant today? And what does it mean to us going forward? And what changes can we make to improve on the act?
Right.
So I'm 100% with you.
Well, many people, again, think that, the Fair Housing Act is just another, liberal law out there to enforce something that's really not happening. And I think people who feel that way may have never been a victim of discrimination. Have you ever been a victim of discrimination?
That's a broad question, and that wasn't part of the rehearsal. I have been a victim of discrimination by my definition of discrimination. I don't know that it fits the universal prototype, but I would like to share with you a story of a very poignant time in my life where somebody shared with me firsthand their experience of discrimination. So with your permission, I'll just go into a quick story. So I was invited to a meeting that was being held at a conference for the LGBTQ community. And they had a lineup of really impressive speakers. I believe Ellen DeGeneres' mom was attending. They had TV personalities, movie personalities. And it was a conference to talk about some of the conditions and some of the challenges being part of that community. I was invited because I had a meeting scheduled with HUD Secretary Julian Castro, who at the time was serving in the Obama administration. And the point of that meeting was, frankly, to talk to him about a need to reform vacant property legislation and rules and foreclosure. So not directly related to LGBT issues. Mm-hmm. But while they said, well, the secretary is finishing up a meeting, Mr. Delgado, if you could wait in the green room, we'll find you when he's available to speak to you. So I went into the green room, and it was a pretty cool experience, right? You got TV personnel, and I'm a nobody. I'm an absolute nobody in this room, but I recognize, hey, I've seen that person before, that movie. And then I see and in the interest of privacy, I'm not going to share the individual's name, but I see a very statuesque woman, Black woman, walking towards me. And she is tall and intimidating, and she does not look happy. And I don't know her, Eric. I have no idea who she is. But you can see when someone has a line on you and they're like, oh, I'm talking to that person. So she got up to within about a foot of my face and she said, you're the mortgage guy, aren't you? And I'm like, no, but I could talk to you. Is everything okay? And she goes, sit down for a minute. And again, she was tall. So I sat down, I listened, and she said something that hurt right out of the gate. She said, why can't I get a mortgage? And I went into banker mode. Right? I said, well, qualifying for a mortgage is a very complex experience and requires a complete review of your financials, including debt to income ratios, both front end and back on. And then there's, of course, consideration of the loan to value. And I'm going through all the mechanics. And she said, sweetie, you're not listening to me. Why can't I, as a transgender woman, get a mortgage? And I said, well, that's a pretty serious allegation. Are you saying that you're not being approved for a mortgage because you're transgender? And she said, that is exactly what I'm saying. I said, and then again, being somewhat ignorant myself at times, I said, are you sure it's not about money? It's not about the finances? And she said, she touched my hand and she said, honey, I make more money than you 10 times over. Trust me, I get paid. And I was like, okay, again, I believe you. It's not about money. It's about who I am. I said, why do you say that? She said, because whenever I fill out an application, I put down my social security number and I'm asked to identify as male or female. And I identify as female. And I get kicked out of the process every single time. And she told me the bank that she applied for, and again, no names are necessary, but I said, that's not right. And she said, well, it's a fraud alert that's keeping me from home ownership. So I think it's important that, and this is what, 6 years ago, pre the Trump administration, the Biden administration, so it was during the Obama administration. That kind of tells you how far we have to go, because there should be no reason for exclusion based on how somebody identifies themselves by use of pronouns. And I just found that story to be powerful. And I did go to work and I did call the CEO of that bank and I did champion her cause. And I did not maintain contact with her, so I don't know whatever happened, but it was moving enough that it stuck with me for years, that we have a problem sometimes in unconscious bias or discrimination for those that we simply, they don't look like us, or they don't sound like us, or they don't behave like us. So that gives us cause to discriminate, and that's just wrong.
Well, that's an interesting story, and unfortunately, in terms of lending, I'm not sure if anything's going to change unless the government changes the Fannie Mae application, where they're currently, to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, Ed, but I don't think that it's either you male or female, and you fall into one of the ethnic or race categories. And so allowing a person to identify for who they are, as opposed to what maybe the government ID and anything else that may come up through investigation might show otherwise, because the changes aren't necessarily reported to some government entity, right?
That's right. That's right. So yeah, and I look, I applaud the executive order that expanded the Fair Housing Act to include orientation as a means of discrimination. And we go back to slow progress. It took decades for that to come about, but it did come about. So hopefully there are those that have benefited from the expansion of the rule, and will continue to administer, monitor, and enforce the rule, not just for lending practices, but for real estate practices as well.
Enforcing the rule, you're familiar with the news that came out a few years ago with realtors discriminating in New York. And as a result of that, NAR implemented a number of policies and training, and many state agencies are trying to bring more attention to how real estate agents are treating people who don't necessarily look like them or from their communities. Have you seen any improvement? Do you think that there's still a problem with discrimination among real estate professionals?
I think there's a problem on both sides, right? I think there's still embedded racism and discrimination in communities that impact real estate agents. And I think that, there's bias in terms of the valuation of assets or the valuation of homes that fuel discrimination. So 2 quick things I'd like to touch on and provide to your audience. Are you familiar with the story of Eric Brown?
No, go ahead. I know it's a good one.
Yeah, so Eric Brown is a Michigan real estate agent, and he's Black, and he's showing a home to his client who's Black, and his client is accompanied by his son, who's 15 years old, who's Black. And the neighbor sees 3 Black men walking into a house, and what does she do? She calls the police. And the police arrive, and they order those people, the occupants of the house, to immediately come outside with their hands to the air. They make them turn their backs to the police, and they're handcuffed on the property. This is a real estate agent. So let me paint the picture. You have a group of officers, 5 police units in total were dispatched. And this is in broad daylight, right? This is not at 3 a.m. This is broad daylight, midday, sun is shining. You get 5 police units out there in a suburban neighborhood. Their guns are drawn. They're handcuffing these people, all of which are Black. No questions being asked. You just do what you're told. So I think your question was, are agents discriminating? I'm sure they are. Are agents being discriminated against? I'm certain they are. And I think it's a problem for real estate agents, hard stop. And when you have a problem of discrimination for agents, it materially impacts or is detrimental to the process, the buying and the selling of homes, right? If you introduce an element of discrimination or racism, you have effectively disrupted the natural order of buying and selling homes, because you're tinkering with the valuation and you're tinkering with the price points and the buyers, which leads me to the underlying root cause, which is appraisals. 98%, and this is not my data, this is from the Department of Labor in the United States, 98% of home appraisers in the United States are white. I need you to think about that. 98%
98% are white.
Department of Labor, I'm citing my data source. I'm not making this up. 98% of all appraisers are white. You cannot ignore what that means in terms of the development of appraisal bias, right? You have a void of color in this industry that can slant the outcome of an appraisal. And there was an interesting report from the Brookings Institute recently that said, look, racial bias in terms of the valuation results in approximately 23% devaluation of homes in Black neighborhoods. Well, 23% doesn't mean anything, right? It's just a number. It just kind of floats in the ether. Translate that to money. It's over $150 billion in lost equity last year. $150 billion that would have gone into the bank accounts of Black families that were selling their home. So if you ask me, is there a problem with the system or real estate agents? Do we still have a problem? Absolutely, yes. It's a major problem. So until we advance to the point where we don't see color and we see people, we will continue to have this problem. I'm going to say it again because it's worth repeating. Discrimination doesn't discriminate. The same thing happens with Latino communities. The same thing happens in Asian communities. The same thing happens in white communities that have a poverty level that they say that there's some measure of a lack of knowledge here. So I'm going to devalue the asset. So let's look at this from a ubiquitous standpoint. Now, are Black families impacted more than poor white families? You bet they are.
Yes.
Hands down, and the data substantiates that. But there is a material problem with the system.
Discrimination does not discriminate, or yes, and I think I love that quote. I'm going to use it, Ed. I'm going to always give you credit. Discrimination does not discriminate, and it is costly to those who are victims of discrimination. And you bring up something interesting. So when you cite the data, the Bureau of Labor, right? 98% of appraisers are white.
Yeah.
Then there are still going to be those who are going to argue and say that why does color have to do, why does the race or color of a person have to do with anything? I mean, there are people who are still colorblind in this country who just believe that anytime you bring up race, that it's some type of, they turn off their brains, if you will, as if they don't want to hear that. They want to believe that everybody, if given an opportunity, is going to do the right thing. Why does everything have to be about race?
I don't think everything has to be about race. I think it's, look, Eric, you and I, again, we go way back. I've spent some time studying unconscious bias or subconscious bias. I often think that it's an easy excuse for somebody that isn't of color to give themselves a pass by saying, well, I know Eric Fraser, he's Black, I can't possibly be racist. That's not an accurate statement.
Right.
And it's not to imply that I am, but the hope is you know, well, I'm not a homophobe. My nephew is gay. Okay, I don't hate Asians. I love Chinese. I mean, these are really out there statements.
Right.
So I think it's more introspective, right? People have to take a look in the mirror and say, am I truly sincere in my disposition and my opinion about my acceptance of others for who they are? A quick personal note. I try really hard not to play in social media. I do, but every now and then I'll put something out. I'm very, very fortunate. I have a lot of followers on my networks. And I put something out that was in support of George W. Bush when he condemned the attacks on the Capitol on January 6th. And former President Bush was very proud and adamant about defending our nation's freedoms, but also understanding that a line had been crossed. The vitriol that ensued against me, Eric, was that I was a rhino, and I didn't know what it meant. I had to look it up. I had to ask people, I said, what's a rhino? And they call him fat again? And they said, no, it means that you are a Republican in name only. And I was like, because I supported President Bush's statement that you find it, oh, I bet you're this, and I bet you voted for Obama, and I bet, and people I've never met, they have no idea who I am. I just put out a retweet of the president's statement on the Capitol attack.
Right.
So again, it's a bit of a societal issue when everybody wants to be heard, everybody's voice needs to be listened to. But I think we're struggling a bit and taking things a little bit too far when we can condemn and convict somebody just for their beliefs.
I agree with you, Ed, and to be condemned because of your position or your support of an idea or an ideology or any particular position, I mean, that's the problem here, that we can't have open civil discussions, or to be condemned for even bringing up race as a problem within an organization or company or even America. And the example that you provide here, the data that you provide is supported, 98% of appraisers are white. It just makes sense that there is unconscious bias. We all have it. I have unconscious bias as an African-American. You as a Latino, white people have unconscious bias. We all have some degree of unconscious bias. But the impact of that is real when you have 98% of all appraisers out there who are white appraising properties of people whom they may feel, different about. And this gets to the question of solutions then. What is the solution? Do we need to have more African-American, Latino appraisers? And if so, how do we fix that issue? What kind of outreach does appraisal management companies have to diversify their population? And if their unconscious bias is leading to billions of dollars of losses for African Americans as it relates to appraisals, then I wonder what the representative loss is in lending. When you look at mortgage companies and banks, and I can say anecdotally, because I've been in banking for 40 years, I've always been one or two of the only African Americans everywhere I've worked over the last 40 years. And it wouldn't surprise me, Ed, if the percentage is similar, like 80, 90, 95% of all mortgage advisors, loan officers, loan consultants, however you want to describe them, are Caucasian. And this could be the reason why the turn down rates, the lack of outreach in African-American communities, Latino communities, the lack of opportunity and access to credit, these are some of the reasons why these things exist.
I hate the word Caucasian. It sounds like a disease. Mr. Delgado, I'm sorry, you have Caucasian. Look, I'll give you another catchphrase. I think we need to be reflective and not subjective. And what I'm suggesting to you is going back to the appraisal imbalance, racial imbalance of appraisers. You want to reflect those that you serve, right? So if you're a bank, you want to reflect the community that you serve in the boardroom, on the floor, in your vendor and your supply chain. You want to reflect the ethnicity and the culture of the communities you serve. And until such time that you can create that, all you're doing is delivering a product. You're delivering a product for consumption, and you're not really creating or serving to your full capacity the dream of home ownership, because it's not reflective of the community and the residents within that community. So these are lofty goals for the industry to say, how can we do it? And look, I'll tell you what, there is a bank that I won't mention at all, and I happen to be out in California. I'm an East Coast guy, but I was rare for me to be in California, but I was. And I happened to be in a Latino community, and I went into a branch for whatever reason. And the branch was like nothing I had ever seen before. It had bright, bright, bright colors. It had a very, very open, friendly atmosphere. It had throw rugs on the main floor of the bank. I was like, what the heck is that? I felt like I was at a coffee shop, and it was a bank. And I asked the obvious question, this doesn't feel like a bank that I worked in New York, or a bank where I used to have meetings in Washington. This is very inviting. And they said, we have a conscious effort to reflect the community. And the majority of residents in this community happen to be of Latino descent. And we found that this gives greater comfort. And if you look at our tellers, they're from the community, and our manager is from the community. And these are people that have lived here for decades. So they're part of the cultural fabric. And that to me is, again, is progress, right? We have to get there with real estate agents and appraisers and title and technology and supply chain. But I'm an optimist this week. I'd like to see more change, and I think we're making progress.
Yeah, change has to happen in order for us to see progress. I'm not sure what more we can do with laws, because many of the laws, like in the case of the 1968 Fair Housing Act, the enforceability of that law is the question. And that's what I want to get to with you. For those of you who are just tuning in and listening or watching, you're listening to Ed Delgado. And Ed always brings it, great information, and he's challenging us to really think about what's going on and the importance of the Fair Housing Act. Ed, I love your story so far. What happened to Brown and his to the agent in Detroit? I mean, it's really sad to see that after 54 years, we are still dealing with discrimination in housing and are looking at people because of the color of their skin as somehow a threat to oneself. This is The Power Is Now Media. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We're celebrating and talking about the 1968 Fair Housing Act. We'll be right back.
Want to keep up with the current developments happening in the world of real estate? The Real Estate Roundtable, hosted by Eric L. Frazier, is a show you do not want to miss. The show features a panel of VIP agents who are passionate about helping people. It is what they do best. They discuss today's hot topics, latest market updates and trends. The panel also conducts interviews with prominent figures in the industry. New episode every Friday live on Facebook and replay on the Power Is Now YouTube channel.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Power Is Now. We are talking to Ed Delgado, who is a managing director of Mortgage Policy Advisors, about the 1968 Fair Housing Act, and we've had a great conversation. Ed, you always inspire me, educate me. I learned something new. Billions of dollars are being lost because of appraisal bias, because 98% of appraisers out there are white. I didn't know that until right now. This is another reason why you need to tune in to The Power Is Now. I guarantee you're going to learn something that you didn't hear before. and the stories. I didn't know about Brown. Is this Mike Brown, Ed? Is it Mike? What's his name again?
Eric Brown.
Eric Brown. I mean, man, I can only imagine how he felt going out there to show a property. The neighbor sees him going to the house, thinks he's probably robbing the place. 5 police officers show up, handcuff the guy. This is a real estate professional.
Yeah.
Something to think about, man.
It's well, just a follow up to that story. Initially, the police were very apologetic. Case of mistaken identity. We're very sorry. Here, let me get these handcuffs off you right away. Oops. And Eric at the time was like, hey, accidents happen. Don't worry about it. Until his attorneys caught up with him and said, hey, we're going to sue everybody. And I'm not familiar with the lawsuit and I'm not taking sides, but hopefully Mr. Brown gets something out of it, because look, if somebody had a gun pointed at me with my hands in the air, that's a life-changing experience. So I feel bad for you.
You bring it up, the lawsuits. Unfortunately, lawsuits is sometimes what it takes to bring about change. Yeah. I mean, every freedom that we enjoy as African Americans in this country is a result of federal legislation and lawsuits. I mean, it seems like you can't just leave it up to people to do the right thing. And that seems to be the overriding theme anytime you talk about laws that somehow in some degree legislate, morality, how people behave, and there are those who think, well, we're going to do the right thing, and so we don't need more government laws or policies intervention, which brings me to the next question for sell by owners. Every real estate agent at one point was an unlicensed individual, and perhaps in selling their home, they saw either the great job or the terrible job the realtor did and say, I can do that. I'm going to get a license, right? And now we see that real estate license are a big part of, and have been for a long time, of the problem of discrimination, steering, and everything else you can think of that's wrong with real estate. And also they are, of course, the very instrumental in making the American dream come true for many, in which they provide support. But home buyers now, home sellers are trying to do it themselves for sell by owners. Today is far bigger today than it has ever been. You can't hardly go online without seeing somebody offering a way for a seller to sell their homes themselves, save their money on commission and get it done. And there are many people, because of the advancement in technology, and we have a whole lot of people who are just smarter today, the aptitude of the consumer, they feel like they can do it anyway on their own and save themselves thousands of dollars. But do they know the law? And I believe they don't. And I think that a lot of discrimination is going unchecked and unchallenged, happening among for sale by owners. And I wanted to get your feedback on that.
You're spot on, sadly. And I think it is a problem. It's a growing problem and concern. And I think the inherent risk on the for sale by owners side is potential violations of the Fair Housing Act, which again is the premise behind our call today. Real estate professionals are just that. They are professionals. They are trained. They are licensed. They are tested. And it's tantamount to me requiring surgery and saying, well, how hard could it be? Maybe I could do it myself. Or maybe this person over here is kind of like a doctor. Maybe they could do it for me. No, you would not take that risk of working with somebody who did not receive a formal education, didn't have the proper training, the proper licensing enforcement, and the history and the practice behind that service. So I think it's somewhat dangerous to assume that an owner has the requisite experience to be on par with a licensed real estate professional. And I think, again, you're spot on, Eric. It's about, well, if I could save some money here, why not do it myself? Hell, the internet's available to me. I'll just look it up. I'll know how to stage a home, and I'll light a candle in the living room and clean up, put away my dirty laundry, and I'll sell this house in record time. And it's a science. I've sold several homes. I'm sure you've well, I know you've managed a lot of real estate transactions, but I rely solely on the expertise of a real estate professional who there's a trust there. And I'll tell you something else, Eric. I whenever I'm buying or selling a home, I interview the agents. I sit them down. It's like a job interview. I'm like, why should I hire you? You tell me why. And they'll say, well, I sell this and I bet. I'm like, no, 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 no. I'm hiring you because you're a professional. I need your qualifications. I'd like to learn more about you. What is your strategy? And I'll narrow it down and I'll make a selection. And at that point, I have full trust and confidence in that professional as I would a surgeon, as I would a lawyer, or any other professional whose services I seek. So I am pro agent in that regard, and I'm not a big fan of, for sale by owners.
Well, I'm not a big fan, and I realize there is some bias here. I am a licensed real estate professional, and everyone in my family, and I work with real estate agents. But I'm also, I'm an advocate for the consumer. And I just believe that since real estate is such a significant part of the US economy, I mean, it's about 13% of our GDP, real estate. And on top of that, it provides stability and the number one driver of wealth for just about all families, regardless of race, and even more particular for minorities. It seems to me that there ought to be some legislation or more control issued at the state level on those who would participate in the sale of real estate. And because we, as a state and as a federal government, we regulate and a whole lot of products, and particularly as it relates to medicine and other services and for selling stocks and bonds. There's a great deal of regulation and controls, and but nothing on real estate outside of being licensed. And I believe that anyone seeking to sell their home should be required to do a certain number of hours of education and training in regard to the law, given then a permit for a limited period of time to be able to sell their home, so that they cannot claim ignorance, or if they're accused of discrimination, then there's further evidence they did so knowingly and with intent. And I really am calling on my local and state officials to really look at what can we do to bring about, to create some deterrence, if you will, from discrimination happening among consumers who sell their homes, just like we are doing from those who are licensed and are under the law. There are deterrents there, but again, they're still doing it. But at least the law is there. There's nothing that really impacts the consumer if they are doing, if they're selling their property specifically to people that look like them, or denying those an opportunity to even view their property because they don't look like them or not from their community. And I believe this is happening. And the evidence of this happening is in every state where you have whole cities that are homogeneous. I mean, am I right? I mean, there's cities where there's nothing but Latinos, nothing but Asians, nothing but Caucasians. And it's like another degree of separation or segregation. And I think it starts with the properties and being sold, and the individuals who are buying those properties wanting first to be in their communities. They want to be with others that look like them. We get that. But it's preventing others who are not in their community to being able to live there and to buy that home.
Yeah, I think you're ahead of the curve, Eric. It's like driving a car, right? If I'm going to drive a car and that's what I'm going to do every single day, I need a license. I need a license and I need insurance. But if I'm just learning and I'm trying to figure it out, I need a permit. And I encourage you and I applaud your efforts. I think owners should have the right to sell their homes, but they need to do so with a permit after completing some education, training, and certification that informs, educates them, because education is the greatest cure for ignorance. You know, if you can educate people and they learn and they understand the rules of engagement, well, then that acts as a deterrent for discriminatory practice. So I listen, if I can help you in any way with what you're pursuing, I know you're starting in California, but you could be onto something that has national implications in terms of helping every owner sell their home if they choose to, but create an entry point, and you just can't randomly go sell your home, because I think you're playing with fire there. And you know, the internet becomes a crutch, right? I've made the mistake of saying, how hard can it be to put in a ceiling fan? And I almost burned a house down because I followed the do-it-yourself steps. It's not easy. It's not easy to put in a ceiling fan, and anybody that says it is doesn't know what they're talking about. So I have to hire a licensed practitioner to do that. And it's the same thing with selling your home, right?
Ed, I've made the same mistake in putting in a garbage disposal.
Don't
I'll
do it.
never forget about it, man.
No
Forget
way.
about it.
And every now and then, here's the thing. Every now and then I'll say, I could do that. And my wife will bring up 4, 5, or 6 projects that resulted in the fire department having to come to the house or something really bad that happened. So no, yeah. And I too, look, it's funny you said garbage disposal. I was at Costco and I'm like, that looks really neat. How many horsepower is that? Oh, I'm going to get one of those. No. Not qualified, my friend.
Well, I'm glad you're making this clarification about the fact that I'm not saying that a person shouldn't have the right to sell their home. I mean, I'm going to sell my home. It's too big for us. We're going to sell. We're going to downsize soon, and we're going to sell it ourselves. But I'm a licensed real estate broker, right? But if I were not, then I would want to be required to know the law.
Yep.
What are the do's and don'ts? You know, and like there's certain things like real estate agents know you can't talk about crime in communities. You can't talk about the ethnicity, the demographics of communities, right? You can't do that. Does a consumer know that, right? You can't. There's a lot of things that the general public, who many every day are thinking, I want to save money, they're getting on this for sale by owner bandwagon, and they don't know that they could be innocently enough violating the law, denying opportunities. And there are those who are going to be overt about it, because we know there are still in this country a lot of just bold-faced, out there, notorious, racist, white power, whatever the case might be, they exist. And so there's no accountability whatsoever. And I think that getting a permit, requiring education would be a great deterrent. And deterrents are a form of enforcement, which brings me to our final question. Well, one more after that, but our final question: how do we make the 1968 Fair Housing Act more powerful? How do we add teeth to the enforcement? Here we are 54 years later, Ed, and the homeownership rate for African Americans is the same as it was when they started just tracking it. What can we do?
Yep. So I did some research, as I always do before I talk to you, because I want to sound smart, sound like you. And we know that HUD is responsible for the enforcement of the act. We talked about that at the start of your program. What are the penalties for violating the Federal Housing Act? Well, the maximum civil penalty, this is as of 2021, for a first-time violation is around $21,000. So you can, if you're an agent or you're an owner and you say, listen, the good news is we haven't had any Black people in this neighborhood as far as I can remember, and you make that statement and you sell your house and your gain on sale is 6 figures, and you got to give up $20,000, not even 20, you know, they said the max is, you know, what's the average? Well, it's about $5,000 or $6,000. You got to peel off $5,000, you do that all day long. So the penalties don't act as a deterrent. The maximum penalty is if you commit 2 or more violations over a 7-year period, So if you're basically a repeat offender, you can be fined up to $100,000. And again, I would point out to you that, look, if you're flipping homes and you're doing this as an owner, or you're an unethical real estate agent, you're stepping all over the act. Is that a lot of money over 7 years? Do the math. No. So for it to be more meaningful, first-time offenders, $250,000 penalty. Wake up, read the act, make sure you abide by the rules of the act. And if you want to make it hurt, make it hurt. But don't do a slap in the wrist for punching somebody else in the face. That's not fair. So that would be my, again, in consideration of potential illicit profits, you need to send a powerful message around the financial implications of people that break the law.
I totally agree. And again, I learned something new. I'd never really looked into what the penalties were in violating the act. And I'm really just amazed. How did that even happen, Ed? $21,000. I mean, in an industry that, 13% of the GDP, billions of dollars being transacted, and $21,000 for violating the act makes no sense. Congress needs to revisit that. Yeah. And add some teeth to it. Not only should there be a $250,000 fine, but there should be even some jail time. Especially if you look at the Newsday series and all the realtors in New York and all the discrimination that took place, how notorious and open they were about it. That's because there's no penalty. What are they going to do about it? Fire me from my office or just go to another real estate office.
Go back in time. What does $21,000 buy you today versus what it would buy you in 1968, right? So there hasn't been a material cost adjustment or penalty adjustment where let the penalty fit the crime. Yes. And if you're precluding somebody that dream of home ownership, go back to what we said at the start. It is part of the fabric and culture of being an American citizen, is the right to own a home. And if you deprive somebody of that right, you're telling me that the penalty for that is $21,000? That's not enough. It's just not enough. Yeah. So I don't think I'm there with you on jail time, because that's a totally different episode for you and I. We're not going to get there today, but I do believe that the penalty should be stiffer.
Okay, well, we'll definitely cover the possibility of jail time on the next year, because we want to invite you back.
No. You're going to get me in trouble, man. Did you hear what he said? Oh, God.
Ed, final question. As you know, you've been on the show many times, and thank you so much for making time. We have this tradition where we ask all of our guests, what does the phrase, "the power is now," mean to you in the context of, who you are, what you do professionally? And since we've been having this great discussion in regard to fair housing, what does it mean in the context of fair housing? The power is now.
Well, it's a softball question, because I think when I hear that, and in particular when you say it, because there's passion and history when you say the power is now. It's very different than when I say it than when you say it. I mean, that's your thing. You are enabled with the power to be a force for good. And that time to be that force for good is now. It's immediate. It's today. It's not something that you put off. It's not something that you listen to. The power that you have to be an ambassador, to be an advocate, to be a cheerleader, to be a spokesperson, that power is now. And we're all given that gift. It's what we choose to do with it. If you choose to remain silent on issues that are critical in nature or potentially could benefit others, well, then you're not using your power the right way. One of the things I admire about you is you have developed and sustained a platform that allows people to help others. And I take it seriously when you call me and say, "Ed, do you want to be on my show?" I like what you said at the very start. You bring it, Ed, and I do, because I want to be part of your success and I want to follow your journey. So that's what it means to me. Now, if we take that statement and we apply it to the Fair Housing Act, The power is now to make those changes. The power is now to educate buyers and sellers. The power is now to change the racial and bias of appraisers in this nation, because it is simply unacceptable, and we must do better, because we cannot stand by and allow ignorance to go ahead and metastasize and cripple our nation with racism and discrimination. And this isn't a blue thing, and it's not a red thing. Stop. That's nonsense. That's easy. That's TV talk. That's fake news nonsense. Don't buy into that garbage. Make a difference, because it's the right thing to do. And that, when you ask me, what does it mean to you? I'm speaking to you from my heart. That's what it means to me.
Ed Delgado, Managing Director of Mortgage Policy Advisors based in Washington, D.C. Ed, thank you so much for doing an incredible job today in educating us, inspiring us with your closing remarks about the importance of the Fair Housing Act. And I certainly hope, folks, that if you're watching, that you'll share this information. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, watch this show and share it on all live streaming devices, Apple TV, Roku, Fire TV. It's on your mobile app. Download Power Is Now TV on your mobile device and share this information. We're going to be talking about the Fair Housing Act of 1968 for the entire month of April. This is our second year of doing it, and I'm excited about the guests that we have for this year's season of shows and of interviews. And so please share the information. I hope you've learned something today. I certainly have. Remember, we are at our best and we maximize our success when we act now. The power is now, folks, to make a change. You can do it. I can do it. We all can do it. Now, the views and opinions that I express today are my own. They are my own. They do not represent First Bank or any organization of which I am affiliated with or work for. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day.